Hey there, how's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be learning how to deploy a static website to GitHub Pages. I mentioned in a community post a while back that I was going to be doing an upcoming tutorial on creating a portfolio website so that everyone can have their own web portfolio out there for potential employers. And using something like GitHub Pages not only allows you to put this out there for free, but also having your site on GitHub will show potential employers that you're at least familiar with the platform and know how to do those basics like creating and updating a repository. So it's a good look all around to have something like this for yourself. Now, I'll also be showing how we can use a custom domain name for this GitHub Pages site so that it looks a bit more professional. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started and see how we can get a static site deployed to GitHub Pages. So first, you're going to need a GitHub account. I'm sure many of you already have one, but if not, just go over to GitHub and sign up. And once we're on GitHub, let's create a new repository. You can either click on the button to create a new repository, or you can go to github.com/new. And this new repository is going to serve as the project directory for our site. So I'm going to create a new repository here. And let me make this just a little bit larger so we can read. Now, the naming of this new repository is going to be important. It needs to be your account name .github.io. So for mine, it's going to be Corey M. Schafer .github.io. That's going to tell GitHub that this is going to be a GitHub Pages repository. Now, the defaults for everything else should be good, but if you'd like to fill in a description or anything like that, then feel free to do that. I'm just going to use all the defaults here and go down to Create Repository. Now, when you create a blank repository, it's going to give you a lot of different options for how we can push our files. We can use an existing project or create a new one. But before doing that, let me show you how just creating this repo with that naming convention has already given us the ability to go live with a website. So for example, it also gives us the option here just to create a new file within our repository directly here within the browser. So if I click this and click on New File, I'm just going to name this index.html. And within here, let's just do a simple H1 tag, and I will say my portfolio, and I will close that out. Oops, and it looks like that closed that off for me automatically. Okay, so now I'm going to commit changes, commit that. And just by doing that, if we navigate to the website that has the name of our repository, then we should be able to see our site. Now, this can sometimes take a bit before it's updated, but let me navigate to this to see if this is live yet. So if I go to corymschafer.github.io, then right now this is still a 404 site, but just give it like a minute or two and I will refresh this and we will see if this is live. Okay, so let me refresh this again. Okay, I'll refresh it again, and now we can see that we have my portfolio there. So now that is up and running. So just by using that naming convention and adding that index.html file and adding in just a little bit of HTML, we have a static site available online. So if you're familiar with how to push files up to GitHub and already have a static site that you've been wanting to push online without messing with more complicated hosting solutions, then at this point, you're basically good to go. And you can do all of this within the browser, even without doing anything on your local machine. Now, a lot of the people know about this feature, but if you're working on a repository that you have the necessary permissions on, which this is one that we do since we just created it, then GitHub has an instance of VS Code within their browser that we can open up and work on our repository. So if I navigate back to this index.html file here, then I can open up an in-browser editor just by pressing the dot key. If I do that, let me see here if... Okay, so I actually don't use this in-browser editor very often. It looks like it's wanting me to sign in using GitHub here. I'm not going to do that right now. I just wanted to show you that this was an option. Basically, anything up here that says github.com, if you instead go to github.dev with the exact same URL, but just change the .com to .dev, then you can open up your files within the browser and edit those there. It's a lot better than going in here and trying to change them with this limited functionality here. Now that github.dev editor, it's great for making changes in a repository where you want to add files, folders, or edit content, but it doesn't run code or anything like that. For that, you need to run GitHub Spaces, which is basically an editor like the one that we just saw, but it's running on a VM that allows you to run code. But that's going to be outside the scope of this video. I just wanted you to know that that's a possibility. So that's one way that you could edit your new site, but most likely you're going to want to have a local repository that you can edit on your own machine and push up to this repo. And I'll go ahead and show how this is done by pushing up my personal portfolio that I have saved on my local machine. Now, when we first created our repository, GitHub gave us some suggestions on how we can begin working on this repository on our local machine, either by creating a new local repository or connecting an existing repository to the one that we created here. Since I created that index.html file, I can't get back to that starting page without recreating it from scratch, but I took a screenshot of the suggestions that they put up whenever you create a new repository. And we can see here that it shows us the commands to either create a new repository on our local machine, or we can push an existing repository. The steps are pretty similar, so I'll go ahead and show how to create a new repository from an existing project and push that up. So I have a project here on my desktop. If I pull this up really quick, if I print my current directory, you can see that I'm just here on my desktop, and I have a sample portfolio that I can upload. So let me cd into this portfolio project, and if I do an ls, then we can see here that we have a lot more files that you might expect on a static website. So we have some images, some CSS. I don't have any JavaScript for this project since it's a fairly simple portfolio, but we could have some JavaScript in here as well. But I'm not currently tracking this project with Git. So if I want to push this up to GitHub, then I'll have to initialize a repository and then connect that to our GitHub repository that we just created. And if you aren't very comfortable with Git commands, then feel free to just follow those commands that they gave you step by step. So I will put these side by side here together. So what we're going to be doing is creating a new repository. So first we need to do a git init, and it initializes our repository. And in the steps that they provide, they add a README markdown, which is usually good to have, but I'm going to skip that part. You can add it if you want. So now we have a Git repo, but we haven't committed our files. First, I'll have to add the files that I want to track, which in my case is going to be everything. I actually already have a git ignore file in this project, which I add to every project, so I'm not tracking useless files that don't need to be pushed up. So to tell Git that I want to track all of the files in my project, I can just say git add and then -a for everything. And if I do a git status, then we can see that it is that all of these are changes that will be committed. And now I can commit that just by saying git commit, and I will put in a message of initial commit. And now that commit was made. Now, if you're not familiar with using Git, then I do have a video on getting started with Git as well, if you'd like to learn more about how to use that in the command line. So I'll be sure to leave a link to that video in the description section below. But now that that's committed, all that's left to do is push this up to the repository that we created. So first, I'll connect this local repository to the one on GitHub. I'm just going to do that by copying pasting the command directly that GitHub gave me here. And actually, this screenshot is from when I created a different testing repository. So this is testing.git. So let me fix this. The repository that we created, it had that naming convention of Corey M. Schafer, our account.github.io. This is the repository here that we want to add as that remote repository. So I'm going to run that. Now, last thing that we're going to want to do before we push this up is to rename our master branch to main. GitHub uses the name main for their master branch, so we're going to follow that convention. Mine is already named main here since that's how I have it set up as the default on my machine. But if you needed to change that, then you could just say git branch with a -m and then say main there. If you run it again, it's not going to hurt anything. And then we can see here that it says that the last step is to do a git push -u origin main. So let's do that. Git push -u origin main. And if I run this, now I'm going to get an error here. And the reason is because I've already created that index.html file in the browser to show you an example of that. So if you were doing that from scratch, then you might not get this error here. Basically, it doesn't know how to handle how I want to handle having two files with conflicting content. So typically, if you run into something like this, then you'd want to carefully merge the files. But in this case, I know that I want the version that's on my local machine. So I'm just going to force that push up to GitHub, and it'll overwrite my Git history with what's on my local machine. So I can do that just by adding force option here. And if I run that, then it should push that up to our remote repository. Now, there's a lot of different ways for credentials and authorization with GitHub. If you try to do this, it might ask you to enter some credentials or authorize so that you can push up those changes. I've got those saved on my local machine. I use the Git Credentials Manager, but you might need to authorize that if you run into any issues pushing that up there. Okay, so now that we've pushed that up, if I go back to my GitHub repository here, then we can see that this has been updated with the files from my local machine. And if I open up the actual location where this should be, so if I reload this page here, so then after a minute or two, this should update with what it is that we pushed up. So this is using a portfolio template that I put together, and I'll be showing how I created this in the next video. So be sure you're subscribed for that. Basically what this does is it takes all of my resume data from a JSON file and generates the HTML using a template. So it makes it easy to, simply update our resume with new data and regenerate different HTML files that we need. Okay, so now you have a way of pushing up your static HTML to GitHub pages, and so far everything has been 100% free. So if you wanted, you could use this GitHub pages URL as your portfolio to send to potential employers, and you'd be good to go. So for example, this one here for me is corymschafer.github.io. If I sent that URL to anybody, then they would see my portfolio here at this website. It's all 100% free. But if you wanted a slightly more professional look, then you can also use a custom domain with GitHub pages. So you could run your website doing exactly what we've done here, but if I wanted this website to be displayed instead as like coryms.com or something like that, then we can set that up as well. So let's go ahead and go over how to do this so that we can see exactly how it's done. It's pretty simple to set up. So first, you need to purchase a domain name. And there are tons of websites that you can use to purchase domains. I use Namecheap. This isn't a sponsored video or anything like that. That's just the service that I've used for my domains for the last 10 years. And I've found them pretty simple or pretty easy to use. So let me go back to my repository here. Now the domain that I'm going to use for this tutorial is going to be myawesomeapp.com. That's just a domain that I bought a while back just to reuse on different tutorials. So to set this up, let's first go to the settings of this GitHub repository. Now these are the specific settings for our repository and not our global GitHub settings. So for our repository settings, which is going to be right here at the top right, I'm going to click on settings. So we're going to get a lot of different settings here for our repository. Now in the sidebar here, since this is a pages that we use GitHub pages, then we should have a pages tab here in the sidebar. So I can see that we have a pages tab here. So I'm going to click on that. And then if I scroll down here a bit, then we can see that we can enter our custom domain. So the one that I'm going to use is myawesomeapp.com, and I will save that. And now if I go down here, then it's going to start a DNS check, and this might take a few minutes. So let me fast forward until this is done. Oh, and even before I stop talking, we can see that it failed. Now, I don't have my domain configured correctly on purpose, because if you're doing this from scratch, then you most likely don't have it configured either. So I'm going to show you how to fix this. So with whatever service we use to buy our domain, there's going to be an option somewhere to set the DNS records for that domain. We need to set these to the IP addresses for GitHub pages. So over in my Namecheap account, I have this pulled up here in my tab. These are all of my settings for this specific domain name on Namecheap. Now, whatever service you use for your domains, you're going to have something similar to this. Now, on Namecheap, to set DNS records, this is over here. After I click on my domain, it's in this advanced DNS settings here. So I'm going to create some DNS records that use GitHub pages IPs. Now, I looked this up beforehand, but these records are in their documentation, and I'll be sure to link the documentation in the description section below as well. But we want to create 4 different A records and use their IP addresses. So the way I'm going to do this here is I'm just going to add a new record. This is going to be an A record, and for the host, I'm just going to put an @ symbol there. This is a shorthand that represents the Apex root domain. And then for the IP address here, I'm going to do 185.199.108.153. Now, like I said, all of this is in the documentation that I'll link below. I didn't know any of this stuff off the top of my head. I had to look it all up using their docs. Okay, so now there are 3 more IPs that I need to go ahead and add in here. Just so you don't have to see me type all these in, I'm going to skip forward a bit until I have added all these in. Okay, so I've added in these additional 3 records here. They're all pretty similar, just incremented by 1 here with these IPs. Now, if we want the www version to work with our domain as well, then we'll add a CNAME record for that and set the value to our GitHub URL, and GitHub will handle that redirect for us. So to do that, I can add a record here. Okay, so I wanted I was overlooking it. It's a CNAME record here for the host. This is going to be www, and then we are just going to let GitHub handle this redirect. So we are just going to type in that GitHub pages URL there. Again, this is all stuff that I found from the documentation. Now, I know that some of this is a bit esoteric, and I'm not explaining a lot of it with these records, but I'm mainly going through the records that the documentation specifies to get up and running here. Now, if we were to dive deeper into exactly what these records are and how they work, then I'd probably need to do a completely separate video on that topic alone. But for this video, I mainly just wanted to show the overview to get you all up and running here. Okay, so now that we have those set on the service where we bought our domain, let's go back to our GitHub settings now. So I have all of these saved here in my DNS settings. And if this hasn't checked the DNS again already, then we can recheck to make sure that things look good. So I'm going to click on check again here, and hopefully this all looks good. Okay, so we can see that the DNS check was successful, and this will also set you up with a TLS certificate, which is what allows us to use the HTTPS instead of just HTTP, which we'll definitely want. So we enforce HTTPS there as well. Okay, so I think everything looks good so far. Now, this can take up to 15 to 30 minutes, but from my experience, it's usually faster than that. And it won't allow us to actually check this enforce HTTPS button until that's complete. It looks like mine is already complete. So like I said, it says 15 to 30 minutes, but sometimes it's automatic. So if it's not allowing you to check this, then just give it some time And if the DNS check looks good, then it will assign that certificate for you and allow you to enforce the HTTPS. So all of this is looking good so far. So first, before we check out our live site, let me go back to our repository here and show you something really quick. So I'm going to go to our repository here, and we can see that everything else was updated 21 minutes ago, but this CNAME here was updated 11 minutes ago. So it added this CNAME to our repo. And if I open this, then the contents of this is just the one line, and it's the domain name that we set up. So we need to leave this CNAME file in your repository and not change it. Some people might not understand where that came from or what it's doing, and they might remove it, but that would mess with the redirecting to our URL. So be sure that that's there and do not delete it or overwrite it. Okay, so now if I go back to our site, if I run this, I just reloaded the page there, and we can see that it redirects us to myawesomeapp.com. So now we have our portfolio live and using our custom domain. So now at this point, I have a portfolio site that's connected to a project on my local machine. And all I need to do in order to update this website is to push and pull changes from this remote repository. So it's super useful if you're someone who has always wanted a website of your own, but you don't want to have to deal with choosing a hosting service and a plan and dealing with your own virtual private server. All that might be overkill if all you want is a static site for reasons like this. And you can do all of that free right here on GitHub. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the portfolio that I'm using here is one that I created using a custom template. So I have all of my resume and portfolio data in a JSON file. And to update this, all I would need to do is update my JSON file with new information and regenerate the static HTML using Python. So there's no need to go in and change the HTML or CSS manually each time I update my information. And that also makes it really easy to create a lot of different versions of a portfolio or resume for different reasons. So you could have it generate several versions using that same data. So maybe one would be more appropriate for a website portfolio, but then you could also have it generate a more traditional resume that you could send to a potential employer where you would remove your picture and social media links and things like that. So I'll be showing how I created this portfolio in the next tutorial. It uses Python and Jinja 2 for templating. We'll take a look at the code, learn how it works, and see exactly how you could build something like this yourself if you're interested. So be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that video if that's something that you're interested in. But with that said, I think that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully now you have a pretty good idea for how you can upload your own static site to GitHub pages for free and easily manage this yourself. But if anyone does have any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. Also, it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon or YouTube, and there are links to those pages in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.